how to do some text effects in Photoshop. I'm going to start out by going to File, New, and just make a new document. I have a fairly large document, but it will work on any size. I'm going to click on the lock on my layers just to unlock it. And right now I do want to have a black background. It should default to white and black, or black and white. If it's any other colors and you want to get back to black and white, you can hit D as in dog, and it will bring you back to the default settings of black and white. And X will swap between the two color palettes here. So I have my foreground, which is the top left one, set to black. And I'm going to open up my paint bucket tool, which might be defaulted to the gradient tool. And if you right click on it, you can go to paint bucket. You can also get it by clicking the G as in good key on the keyboard. And I'm going to fill in black for the background. I'm going to hit T for my type tool, which is also found right here. And right now if I start typing, I won't be able to see anything because my color is still black. So I'm just going to hit X to swap to white. And I'll type in glow. It will work with any letters. If you hit V, you can move your text around. You will see a little purple line when you get to the middle, and you can very easily center your picture or your text or any image that you have in Photoshop to your canvas. I have a new layer right above my original background layer. It is a type layer, and I have two options up here: opacity, which will just make it slightly transparent and then eventually disappear, and fill, which will look like it's doing the same thing, but what fill is doing is it's actually just getting rid of the white, but it still will have information about where the text is, which is really helpful for some of our layer effects that we are going to do. You can either double click anywhere on the layer in the gray, or you can right click and go to blending options. This will bring up your layer styles and your blending options, and we have the same opacity and fill opacity that we have in our layers. I'm going to bring my fill opacity down to 0, and now I can turn on a stroke, and I can have an outline around my letters. You have at the top size, which will just make it bigger or smaller. It is measured in pixels. And you have outside, inside, or center position, depending on where you want it. Blending opacities, if it's going to blend with something in the background. Opacity of the stroke. And down here we have fill type that says color, and we can change it to red or blue, whatever color you want. If you don't want a color, you can go to gradient, and it gives you your gradient options. If I click on this black to white gradient, I have a lot of different gradients that Photoshop comes with. You can also make your own. But if I want to have a blue gradient, I can click on blue and get a little bit more color effects going on. When you like it, hit OK. You can reverse your gradient. You can have different radial or layouts for the gradient, and you can change the angle of it. When you're happy with what you have, you can hit OK, and it will be part of your text. You will see all of your layer options or layer blending options underneath your text effect. So I can turn off the effects or the stroke. And if I have more than one of them, I'll have a long list of all the different effects. I'm going to open that menu back up, and I'm going to bring this back just to a solid color. You're only going to see the options for what you currently have selected. So if you click on the word stroke, I will see my stroke options. If I turn on gradient overlay, but I don't click on the word, I will not see the gradient overlay options. You actually have to click on what you're going for. But I don't want to have gradient overlay. I'm going to go down to an outer glow. And the outer glow gives you a fuzzy glowing effect around your text or whatever you apply this to. You can change its size, color, and have some pretty simple options to figure out. Opacity is just the intensity of it. Noise will give you a pixelated effect to it. And spread will also make it bigger or smaller. Inner glow is similar, but it will happen on the inside instead of the outside. And you have a lot of different effects for it. When you're happy, you can hit OK. You can still move it around. You can change the letters, and it will keep the same effect. Over a drop shadow effect. So I'm going to make a new type layer. Type in shadow. Again, it'll work with any word. Double click or right click and go to blending options on my shadow text layer. And at the very bottom, there is drop shadow. By default, it's not going to work. For starters, we have a black shadow with a black background, so I'm just going to change it to white. And it defaults to multiply for the blending mode, which will mean you won't be able to see it with our current selection. It will work if you have an image for a background and you want to make that shadow look like it is part of the actual image. But for now, I'm going to change this to normal. And now when I change some of my settings here, I can get more and less of a shadow effect. So I'm just using distance, spread, and size. And you have an angle so you can move it wherever you want. Noise will make it pixelated, and you have different ways of giving it different contours if you want to give it some more effects. Anti-alias will smooth out some of the edges if it looks a little bit too pixelated or jagged. AA or anti-alias does a pretty good job at smoothing it out. Some pretty general text effects. So I have my text. It is just barely big enough, but I'm going to scale it down a little bit. You can either select it and bring it down to a different size font, or if you don't know exactly what size you want, you can hit Command-T on a Mac or Control-T on Windows, and that brings up your free transform. You can also find it under Edit and Free Transform. And I can hover over one of these corners, and I can make it bigger or smaller. So back in the text tool, right now I have a little box around that type symbol. If I bring it down to my letters, that box goes away. When that box isn't there, I can click. If I click 3 times, it'll select all of my lettering. And I can come up to the very top menu. And over here, there's an italicized T with a little line under it. There you go. If you get that, just say OK. And style is none. So if I go to arc, I'll have an arc effect or a lower arc. And there's a lot of different presets that Photoshop has. They all have different sliders, so you can change the intensities of them. And when you're happy, you can hit OK. And any other lettering that you have will use the same effect. So I'm going to turn off these layers just by clicking on those eyeballs. And I'm going to just keep this default text. And I'm going to open up my character window. So if I go up to Window and come down to Character, I have some more text effects that I can do. Let's turn off all that. So right now I don't have any text effects turned on. Down here at the bottom I have some pretty simple ones. I have a bold effect, italicized, all capitals or small capitals, and then other different scripts, underlines, and a strike through. Up here I have my normal font size and my font type. And let me put something on the next line. There we go. And I can make the letters bigger or shorter. So they do have to be selected. And then I have same thing, but it's for horizontal spacing, vertical alignment, just kind of where it sits compared to where it was originally, and you can go through and do a lot of different effects. If you highlight just one letter, you can change just that one. Sometimes it will look like more than what I want is selected, but it is only that top one that is currently being affected. So I can have a lot of control over how the letters will be placed. And this makes it a little bit more interesting than what you might have by default. And that is under Window and Character. Layer effects that I used before will work on modified text as well. So if I right click and go to blending options, I can go to stroke, and I don't have to have my fill set to 0. I can still have the white lettering and have any color I want for a stroke. The outer glow will still work as well. And you have access to all of the same options that you had before. A simple effect that is called the knockout effect. I have my text set up how I want it. I use some of the character styles to customize the spacing a bit, and I have a picture for my background. I'm going to come over here on the bottom of my toolbar to my shape tool. If you right click on it, you'll have rectangle. The hotkey is U, and I have black set for my color, and I'm going to drag a box around all of my lettering and make it a little bit bigger than what I need. I will have just a black box around it. I do have these little circles in the corner that I can round it out if I want to. If you want to make it bigger, you can just drag it bigger or smaller. I'm going to put it underneath my letters and then open up my layer blendings for my text. So right click and layer blendings. I'm going to bring my fill opacity down to 0 and my knockout to shallow, and then hit OK. And what that does is it is removing all of the background information. Everything on every layer underneath these texts is now gone. I don't want it to knock out quite this much. I don't want the background gone. So I'm going to select my text, hold down Command on a Mac or Control on Windows, and select my rectangle layer, and then come down to the bottom of my layers and click this little folder. So now the knockout effect is only affecting what is in this folder. Sometimes this is where you can stop, but for this image, the lettering is a little bit faint. So I'm going to open up my layer blending again and go down to stroke. And now you can have a nice outline on these letters that make it much easier to see. It also does work with a gradient, so you can have some cool coloring and a nice text effect very quickly.